I can still hear the water that night. The lake was so still it looked like glass, reflecting the pale moonlight through the fog. My footsteps along the dock echoed too loudly, as if the silence of the woods was pressing in around me. Even the crickets had gone quiet. I remember pausing, trying to calm my breathing. The cabins behind me stood in a crooked line, their windows glowing faintly from the lanterns we had left burning inside. But the light didn't feel warm. It only seemed to push the shadows deeper. Something shifted near the tree-line. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends stepping out, but there was only stillness. Then I noticed it, a tall, thin figure on the far end of the dock. Its outline darker than the night itself. No features, no face, just an emptiness shaped like a person. The fog curled around it, but it didn't move. I thought maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the mist was playing tricks. But then it leaned forward slightly, like it was watching me breathe. That's when I realized I was not alone at the Lakeside camp, and that stepping closer was a mistake I would never forget. The lake was still that evening. A faint mist curled across the water, hugging the shoreline. The air smelled of damp pine and something older, something I couldn't name. I walked toward the dock, my boots pressing softly into the mossy earth. The wooden planks creaked under my weight, each one echoing farther than it should have. A pale light from the moon caught the ripples, sending silver lines dancing across the surface. At the end of the dock, I saw it, a shadow, tall, unmoving, faceless. It didn't wave, didn't shift. It was waiting. I blinked, and when my eyes opened, it was a little closer. Not moving, yet somehow closer. The night air grew heavier, pressing against my chest with every breath. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection, a tree, a campfire glow from somewhere beyond the pine line. But it wasn't. Its outline was too defined, too deliberate. The darkness around it was almost perfect, like it had been carved from the night itself. I tried to step back. My boots meant nothing but the dock's wood, rigid underfoot. The silence stretched. Only the water whispered against the posts, and my own heartbeat thudded loud in my ears. I called out, just a soft, trembling whisper. "Hello?" The shadow didn't respond. It didn't need to. The fog thickened. It rolled in from the lake, brushing against my legs, crawling up my sleeves. And still it was there, closer somehow, though its shape hadn't changed. I looked down at the water. The moon's reflection shivered. For a moment, I thought I saw ripples, though nothing had entered the lake. The shadow's presence seemed to pull the surface, twisting it into subtle waves that shouldn't exist. A shiver ran down my spine. The air felt electric. I could almost hear it breathing, or was that my own pulse echoing back to me? I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I tried to blink it away, thinking it might vanish. And yet, when I opened my eyes, it was closer again. Closer enough that I could see the faint suggestion of shoulders, but still no face. A void where everything should be. I felt drawn to it, and every step I imagined taking toward it made the dock groan like it was alive. A soft wind stirred. It smelled of wet earth, of old bark, and behind me, the forest seemed to hold its breath. I crouched, squinting, trying to find anything human. A shadow that moved with intention leaves traces, I thought. But there were none. No footprints. No sound beyond the lake's gentle lapping. I whispered again, barely above a breath. "Are you real?" The mist curled around the shadow's legs. The dock seemed to stretch, each plank longer than the one before. And then, I blinked. It was at the very end now. Still, silent, impossibly close. I stepped backward. My foot slipped on wet wood. A hand reached toward me, but the shadow had none. A presence, not a body. The night was quieter than before. Even the wind had stopped. I wanted to turn and run, but something held me, a weight in the air, soft and patient, waiting for me to understand that I wasn't supposed to leave. The dock beneath me felt smaller, fragile. Every step away was a step into nothing, and the shadow, it waited. I dared not blink again. I dared not breathe too loudly. I leaned over the edge of the dock, watching the water catch the moonlight. Everything looked calm, too calm, and then I realized I could see my own reflection perfectly. But the shadow's presence was there, too, looming behind me. I turned. It didn't move. It couldn't. It was not human. The lake whispered. The wind returned, brushing across my skin. And in that moment, I understood something quiet and terrible. It would always be there, waiting, watching, not moving, yet somehow always closer. I stepped off the dock. The water was cold, biting at my feet. I ran, but in my mind, I could still feel it at the end of the planks. Faceless, silent, and closer than it had been before. The camp was quiet that evening. The sky was bruised purple, fading to deep navy as the sun sank behind the trees. Lanterns flickered along the paths, soft pools of orange in the darkening woods. Most cabins glowed warmly inside, windows spilling light onto forest floor. But one remained black. I first noticed it from the edge of the clearing. A small wooden structure, but completely dark. No reflection, no glow, nothing. Curiosity pulled me closer. My boots crushed dry leaves and pine needles. A faint wind whispered, carrying the smell of damp wood and smoke from distant fire pits. The forest seemed to lean in, watching me approach. I stopped at the doorway. No light inside. No sound either. Just a thick, almost tactile darkness that pressed against my eyes. I pressed my hand against the frame. The wood was cold, unnaturally so. I expected it to feel like the other cabins, warm from the lingering heat of the day. But this one held a chill, as if it had trapped the night inside. I peered through the window. At first, I saw only shadows. Flickers that might have been branches. Then movement, shapes shifting behind the glass, but no light to reveal them. I stepped back. The wind carried a low hum, soft at first, then sharper, like a chorus of whispered voices from the walls themselves. I tried to tell myself it was the breeze through the trees, but the shadows moved with intention. I circled the cabin, careful to stay on the path. Each side looked the same, dark, silent, waiting. A rustle came from inside, soft, deliberate, like someone or something walking across the floor. I held my breath. The sound stopped. Then it came again, closer. I leaned against the nearest tree. My heart hammered, loud and irregular. The air felt thicker now, heavy, moist, as if the cabin had inhaled the forest and was holding it, waiting for me to enter. I considered looking inside. I wanted to, desperately. The urge was like a pull in my chest, quiet but unrelenting. But the moment I imagined stepping forward, I felt it, a presence behind the darkness, watching, not a human watching, something older, patient. The shadows shifted again, slid along the floor. They didn't stumble or hesitate. They moved with purpose. I pressed my hand to my mouth. I could almost hear footsteps now, soft against the unseen floorboards, closer than the walls should allow. I tried to speak, but my voice was caught somewhere between my throat and my chest. Only a shivering breath escaped. Then the window fogged as if someone or something had leaned close to the glass. I wiped it with my sleeve. Nothing, just my own reflection, pale and trembling. A soft scrape sounded from inside, slow, deliberate, the kind of sound that could make the skin on your arms crawl. And then silence. I stepped back from the window. Every instinct screamed to leave, but still, I stayed. The forest seemed to lean closer, the wind holding its breath. I could feel eyes from the darkness, watching, following, waiting. It was patient. It didn't need to move to scare me. I imagined the cabin alive, breathing slowly, shifting in the shadows, filling with shapes I could not name. And I understood in a quiet, sinking way, this cabin wasn't empty. It never had been. Even without light, even without a sound that made sense, it was occupied. I turned to leave. Every step away felt longer than it should. The forest seemed to stretch, the path twisting subtly. The darkness of the cabin lingered in my vision, in my mind, like smoke that refuses to dissipate. Behind me, the air whispered again. Soft footsteps, perhaps, or nothing at all. But I felt the weight of the darkness, pressing, patient, eternal. I didn't look back. The cabin remained, silent, dark, waiting. And I knew it would still be there when I returned. No light would ever touch it. No sound would ever betray it. It was alone yet alive. The forest swallowed me back into its fading glow. The cabin stayed behind, an impossibility in the night. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching me the whole time. The lake was quiet that night. A soft haze hung low over the surface, thick enough to blur the moonlight into pale silver. I sat at the end of the dock, legs dangling over the water, listening. The smell of wet wood and pine lingered in the air. A faint hum came from the forest, the quiet vibration of insects settling into the night. Everything seemed still, too still. I traced my fingers across the rough wood, feeling the cold seep into my skin. The water below mirrored the stars, perfectly smooth, glass-like. I leaned forward. I wanted to see my reflection. It was there, and yet not quite. A flicker, a subtle distortion in the silver sheen. I thought I imagined it at first. A ripple spread across the surface, slow, gentle, as if someone had stepped in. But the water was empty. I froze. The air seemed to grow heavier, pressing against my chest. A faint smell of something wet, earthy, drifted upward, mingling with the pine. The ripples moved outward again. Steady, silent, no splash, no sound beyond a faint hiss of the lake against the dock posts. I leaned closer. The reflection of the moon danced across the ripples. But the ripples weren't random. They formed patterns, subtle, deliberate, concentric circles spreading outward as if something aware had entered the lake. I held my breath. The hair on my arms prickled. The night seemed to tilt around me, slow and patient, waiting for my next move. Another ripple. Closer this time. Fanning toward the dock. Closer. I stood, my boots pressed against the wet wood. The dock groaned underfoot. I peered into the dark water. Nothing, but I could feel it, a weight beneath the surface. Shifting slowly, deliberately, just out of sight. A soft breeze stirred the trees. It carried the faintest echo, like laughter or a whisper movement beneath the surface. I shook my head. No, that couldn't be real. Yet every ripple told a story the water refused to reveal. A presence, waiting, watching. I leaned over the edge again. The water was cold, biting at my fingertips. The reflection of the stars trembled. I thought I saw something move in the depths, a shadow shifting just below the surface. But when I blinked, it was gone. I tried call out. My voice dissolved into the night before reaching the far shore. Only the lake answered, stretching the ripples across the silver black. My heart thumped loudly, echoing in my ears. I could hear nothing else. No birds, no insects, just the water, moving impossibly on its own. I stepped back. The dock felt narrower somehow, like it was shrinking beneath me. And still, the ripples kept coming, forming patterns that my mind couldn't follow. I considered leaving, but curiosity pinned me in place. I needed to see, to understand. The next ripple was different. It lingered, not fading into the rest. A subtle swell, rising in a way that suggested intent. Something beneath it waited. Patient, silent. I crouched closer, staring into the dark. The moonlight revealed nothing. No feet, no shadow, no shape. Just water. Smooth, silent, waiting. I felt a movement under my fingers, the gentle tremor of the dock. Or was it the water? A tug, subtle, not strong enough to unbalance me, but enough to remind me that the lake was not empty. The breeze shifted again. A faint, cold scent of earth and decay drifted across the water. I pulled back, realizing my breath had caught in my throat. The lake was calm, but the calm felt deliberate, like it was bait. Another ripple spread, closer, and this time I thought I saw a form, something elongated, moving beneath the surface in a way that made my stomach twist. I blinked, and it vanished. The night pressed in, heavy and quiet. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my body felt rooted. The ripples continued, soft, deliberate. No sound, no shape, just movement. I stumbled back from the edge, knees hitting the damp wood. The water reflected only moonlight, perfectly calm, too calm. And then I realized the ripples were still coming, as if whatever moved beneath the lake had noticed me, as if it had been waiting for me to look. I turned to leave. My boots slipped slightly on the wet planks. I kept my eyes on the water, half expecting it to reach up to drag me in. The ripples stretched toward the far shore, fading slowly, but I could feel them in my chest, in my bones. The lake stayed silent, still, and beneath it, I knew something remained. Patient, waiting. I didn't look back. I didn't want to, but the memory of those ripples, the knowledge that something unseen had been moving just below the glassy surface, followed me back into the night. It was just past dusk when I wandered along the row of cabins. The sky had faded to a muted gray, the last hints of light slipping behind the pine line. A soft breeze moved through the camp, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke from dying fires. Most cabins glowed warmly, the windows spilling light onto the ground. Footsteps whispered along the paths as other campers returned inside. I moved slowly, letting the quiet stretch out before me, feeling the night settle into my chest. Then I saw it, a face, pale, still, silent, watching me from the window of one cabin. I stopped. The moment felt too sharp, too sudden. The air grew colder, brushing against my neck. I blinked. It didn't move. I stepped closer. The window reflected the fading light, but the face, it didn't belong to me. Eyes wide, empty in a way that made my stomach twist. Skin almost translucent, as if lit from inside by a faint, sickly glow. I hesitated. A pulse of fear crawled along my arms. Something was wrong. It shouldn't have been there. I pressed my hand to the window. The glass was cold beneath my fingers. And yet, the face remained, unmoving, staring. I leaned in, trying to see inside the cabin, but it was empty. No furniture, no shadows, only the chill, a room that smelled of damp wood and something older. I stepped back. The breeze whispered through the pines, a soft rustle against the cabin siding, and the face stayed, pressed close to glass, watching. I circled the cabin slowly, heart hammering. Every window reflected only darkness. Every corner held silence. But the window I had seen, the face, it lingered in my mind, a shadow I couldn't shake. I tried to speak. Hello. My voice was soft, swallowed immediately by the night. No reply, only the faintest echo, as if the cabin itself had absorbed the sound. I crouched, peering closer. The face seemed to shrink slightly, or maybe my eyes were tricking me. A breath fogged the glass. I wiped it with my sleeve. Still nothing inside. A shiver ran down my spine. The air tasted of cold metal and wet pine. My hands trembled, and the face, it stayed. I moved back toward the path, eyes never leaving the window. The forest pressing around me, the trees standing tall, still, patient. It felt like the whole world had hushed, waiting. Then, as I stepped onto the path, I blinked. The face was gone. I froze. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to look back, but I didn't. I felt its presence anyway, lingering, pressing against the night. The wind shifted. A faint rustle behind me, soft, deliberate. I turned slowly. Nothing, only the forest, swallowing shadows into itself. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, a trick of the fading light, a reflection, but the memory burned in my mind, sharper than any trick of shadow or glass. I glanced at the cabin again. The window was empty, just dark, cold wood framed by the trees, and yet I could feel the weight of eyes on me, watching from inside the darkness, waiting. I hurried along the path, trying not to look back. Every step echoed in my ears. The cabin receded behind the trees, yet the feeling of being observed followed me. It pressed against my back like a chill, silent and unyielding. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. The campfires flickered warm and soft. Other campers moved quietly, unaware. I could breathe again for a moment, but in the back of my mind the face remained, pale, still, unblinking. It had watched me, and I had no way to know why. Even as I returned to my cabin that night, the image lingered, the cold light of that window, the empty room behind it, and the certainty that something had been there, something that wasn't human. I told myself it was gone, but I didn't believe it. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. The campfire had burned low, leaving only embers glowing faintly in the darkness. A soft wind brushed through the pines, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke from the dying fire. I held the camp lantern in my hands. The glass was fogged from the heat of my fingers. I clicked it on. A small flame flickered, casting pale light across the clearing. It was warm, comforting, almost normal, but it didn't last. The flame sputtered, hesitated, and died. The light vanished. I cursed softly under my breath. Shaking the lantern, clicked it on again. The tiny flame returned, flickered, died. Each time, the darkness grew heavier around me. The forest seemed to lean closer, its shadows stretching into the clearing. I could feel the night pressing in. Then I heard it, soft footsteps in the dirt. Crunch, crunch, slow, deliberate. I froze. The sound was close, just beyond the lantern's fragile glow. I blinked. The flame returned, briefly illuminating nothing. No one there. I shook the lantern again. A stubborn flame sparked to life. It cast long, wavering shadows across the ground. The pines swayed without wind. The dirt near my feet shifted, as if something moved just beyond sight. The flame died. The footsteps stopped. A breath of wind stirred the air. The lantern clicked on again, but I felt eyes unseen, watching from the darkness. I gripped the lantern tighter. The flame flickered wildly. The shadows around me stretched, twisting toward the glow like living things. I could hear soft rustling, leaves maybe, or something else, something deliberate. I stepped toward the fire pit, tried to stay in the dim warmth of the embers. Each time I moved, the flame sputtered, dying before I reached it. And each time it went out, the footsteps returned, soft, crunching, circling. I crouched near the fire, shaking. The lantern glowed briefly in my hands, flickered, died. The footsteps grew closer, not running, not frantic, slow, patient, following, waiting. And I realized I couldn't tell where they stopped or started. The darkness had its own rhythm, moving with intent. I clicked the lantern again. Light returned, harsh and pale. And then I saw it, just for a moment, a shadow, taller than any camper, stretching across the clearing. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. The darkness itself seemed to carry it. I blinked. The flame died. Silence. I whispered to myself, voice trembling. It's just the night, just shadows, nothing there. The footsteps returned. Closer now. Crunch, crunch, all around. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the forest had exhaled. The embers glowed faintly, mocking the darkness that now seemed alive. I could hear soft breathing, or maybe my own echoing back at me. I clicked the lantern on again. The light shivered, flickered, and for a split second, the shadow was closer, leaning out from the trees. Tall, silent, unblinking. I stumbled backward. The lantern died, and the footsteps paused. I held my breath. The clearing waited. The forest waited. Even the night seemed to pause with me. Then the footsteps began again, soft, deliberate, circling. I tried to run. My boots met wet dirt. The clearing stretched before me. The lantern flickered in my memory. Useless in my hands. I stopped. The night pressed in, thick and quiet. The fire pit glowed faintly, but the warmth didn't reach me. The footsteps stopped. The shadows receded slightly. I didn't move. I couldn't. The lantern's light returned once more, flickered, and for a final moment, the clearing was empty. No shadow, no figure, only the soft rustle of the wind through the pines. I sat down heavily, the lantern dying for the last time. The night seemed to sigh around me. No footsteps now, no shapes, only the knowledge that something had been circling me, watching, waiting, patient, and even in the silence, I could feel it lingering, closer than I could see, closer than I wanted to imagine. I didn't relight the lantern again. I didn't move until the first light of dawn crept into the clearing. By then the footsteps had gone, but the memory of them, the quiet, patient steps circling in the dark, stayed with me. Always. Dawn came slowly that morning. The sky was pale, tinged with soft pink and gray. A gentle mist hovered above the lake, blurring the line between water and air. I walked along the shore. The sand was cold and damp beneath my feet. A faint hum of the morning. The birds, the wind through the pines, stirred softly, barely audible. At first, everything seemed normal. The other campers moved quietly along the path, gathering their things. But then, I noticed the shadows. They stretched along the shoreline, long and thin in the early light. But they didn't belong to anyone. I paused. The morning air felt suddenly heavier, almost sticky. The shadows moved differently than the people who cast them. Slow, separate, alive. I stepped closer to the water's edge. The sand pressed cold and wet beneath my boots. The shadows mirrored no one. Each one stretched in a way that was unnatural, bending at angles that should have been impossible. I called out softly, my voice catching my throat. "Hello." No reply, only the gentle lap of water against the shore. I followed the shoreline, keeping the shadows in view. They move as if guided by something unseen, stretching toward the water, bending around trees, curling over rocks, not matching any body, any movement. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the morning light. Mist can play games with perception. Shadows can stretch longer in the low sun. But my chest knew better. A breeze stirred. The faint smell of wet pine and cold mud filled the air. I shivered. The shadows shifted in response. Or perhaps they had always been moving. Subtle, deliberate, patient. I knelt to touch the sand. The shadows stretched over my hands, brushing my fingers. Not solid, but weightless, yet unmistakably present. The touch was cold, like the lake itself had reached out to me. I looked at the water. The lake reflected the early sky perfectly. But in its mirror, the shadows didn't exist. They only lived at the edge, along the shoreline, moving independent of anything real. I took a step back, and one of the shadows stretched toward me, just for a moment. Then it retracted, blending with the others along the sand. I stumbled to my feet. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the birds had gone silent. The shadows continued their slow dance along the edge, unbroken, relentless. I tried to follow them, to understand. Each step made the sand sink slightly under my weight, leaving prints that the shadows ignored. It was as if the shoreline itself belonged to them. The sun's pale light did nothing to diminish them. They were older than the day. The water rippled softly. No wind, no movement, and yet a shadow bent slightly toward the lake, stretching across the sand. I backed away. The other campers laughed somewhere farther along the shore, unaware. I wanted to join them. I wanted to forget, but I couldn't. The shadows twisted, coiling around driftwood, around rocks, along every contour of the sand. They didn't mimic reality. They bent it. They moved freely, alive in a way that should have been impossible. I kept walking, trying to put distance between myself and the shoreline. But no matter how far I went, the shadows followed. Not behind me, not ahead, always at the edge, lingering. I stopped at the treeline. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the forest fully. The other campers' voices grew louder. Warmth, light, life. And still, the shadows stretched along the lake, unbroken. A faint shiver ran down my spine. The morning sun rose higher, and yet they remained. I realized then that no one would ever see them but me, that even in daylight, they belonged to the shoreline, to the lake, to something older than the camp itself. I turned back once, just for a moment. The shadows were still there, moving independently of the world. And in that moment, I understood. I had walked the shore too late, seen what should not be seen, and now the memory of those shadows would follow me forever. I stepped into the forest. The voices of the campers swallowed me, but the edge of the lake remained behind, and so did the shadows, waiting, patient, silent. Night had settled like a heavy blanket. The forest smelled of damp pine and earth, thick with the weight of the day's heat fading into cold. Campers' voices had dwindled to whispers or ceased entirely. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. I approached the tent quietly. It was zipped tight, small and gray, ordinary enough, except for the way it moved. The fabric rustled, softly, as though someone shifted inside. I froze. The night pressed closer, thick and still. I could hear nothing else, No footsteps, no distant laughter, only the rustling of that tent. I crouched listening. The movement inside repeated. Gentle, deliberate. It wasn't random. It was waiting. I whispered, almost to myself, "Hello?" No answer, only the rustle, brushing against the nylon walls. I pressed my hand to the zipper. Cold, damp, slightly sticky, as though the air itself had condensed on the surface. I slid it down slowly. Inside, nothing. The tent sagged inward where someone should have been. The fabric bulged slightly, like a weight still occupied the space, invisible but undeniably present. I reached a hand in. Empty, cold, still the bulge remained. I stepped back. The wind picked up briefly, brushing through the forest, shaking the tent gently. And then silence. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, a trick of shadows, a fold in the fabric. But the bulge was too deliberate, too intentional. I crouched closer again, studying the inside. The zipper's teeth gleamed faintly in the pale light of the moon. I heard a soft whisper of movement again. The tent shifted slightly, a subtle pressure, as though someone or something was still seated inside. My chest tightened. The forest around me seemed to lean in, holding its breath. Every shadow stretched longer, thinner, darker than the last. I spoke again, my voice catching in my throat. "Is someone there?" The only reply was a faint rustle of the nylon walls, a movement that mimicked life, but contained no shape. I circled the tent. The air smelled damp, metallic, and slightly of something older, earth and decay. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my feet stayed planted. The bulge inside the tent remained. Patient, waiting. I imagined the tent alive, breathing slowly, exhaling the forest darkness through its seams. The weight inside shifted again, just slightly, enough to remind me I was not alone. A branch snapped in the distance. The sound startled me. The tent reacted. The bulge expanded, as if sensing the noise. The nylon pressed outward, alive with intent. I tried to step back, but the ground felt different beneath my boots, soft, almost forgiving, as though the forest itself were holding me in place. I unzipped the tent fully. The opening gaped at me, empty, no figure, no face, no presence beyond the slight bulge in the fabric. Yet I could feel it, the memory of weight, of something sitting silently, unseen. A gust of wind stirred the forest again. The tent swayed gently. I shivered. Every instinct screamed to run. I leaned over the entrance once more. The moonlight illuminated the empty space. Cold, still, silent, and then the bulge shifted inward, not falling, not collapsing, as though the presence that had been there remained, only invisible now, a weight in the air, something patient. I closed the zipper slowly, feeling the tension of unseen eyes on me. The tent returned to its quiet shape. The forest returned to its muted stillness. The night breathed around me. I didn't move for a long time. I couldn't. I could feel the hollow presence lingering, even without a body. I walked back toward the campfire, keeping my eyes on the ground. The light of the fire flickered faintly, distant and warm. But behind me, I knew the tent waited, patient, silent, unseen. Even as I reached the glow of other campers, I felt it, the hollow weight in the night, the subtle, impossible bulge that refused to vanish, the knowledge that something had been there, and it still was. The forest carried its quiet with me, and the tent remained small and gray, breathing the night, a hollow space, filled with presence. The night was still. Stars hung faintly in the sky, veiled by a thin mist rolling off the lake. The campfire crackled softly, the smoke curling into the dark like a slow sigh. We sat in a circle, close to the embers. The warmth of the fire kissed my skin. The smell of pine smoke and wet earth filled the air. Everything seemed ordinary, almost comforting. But then the fire died, slowly, as if the flames were being swallowed by the night itself. I leaned closer. Only smoke rose, curling into the darkness. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the air was still. No breeze stirred. And the smoke, it lingered, thick and deliberate, not rising naturally. Shapes began to form. At first vague, flickers in the curling smoke. I squinted. Figures, faces, shadows, reaching upward from the thin gray. I swallowed hard. The others spoke quietly, unaware. I couldn't warn them. I couldn't move. The shapes became clearer. Tall, thin, twisting forms hovering just above the embers. They didn't speak. They didn't move in the wind. They simply lingered. A faint chill brushed across my neck. The fire pit felt impossibly cold, as if the warmth had been pulled out entirely. The smoke shaped itself into faces. Empty eyes staring, mouths barely open, frozen in silent screams. I tried to blink. The figures didn't vanish. Instead, they drew closer in the smoke, curling around the circle's edges. I could feel their weight pressing against my skin, watching, waiting. The faint hum of the forest faded. No insects, no birds, only the smoke twisting in impossible ways. And the fire still out. I whispered under my breath, barely audible, "Is anyone else seeing this?" No answer. The others were quiet, staring at the empty circle, unknowing. The smoke thickened. The figures became sharper. Faces twisted in impossible angles. Bodies melting into shadows. I could feel them leaning into the circle, pressing inward, yet never touching the ground. I wanted to stand. I wanted to run. But something heavy rooted me to the earth. My legs refused to move. My chest felt tight. The fire pit was only smoke now, but the smoke had weight. I blinked. One figure drifted toward me, thin and elongated, reaching with impossible arms. I couldn't scream, couldn't speak. My own breath caught in my throat. The circle felt smaller, tighter, closing around me. The smoke shapes curled higher, reaching for the center where I sat. I could smell cold ash and damp earth, a metallic tang that made my stomach twist. I leaned back. The figures didn't retreat. They hovered, patient, relentless, impossibly still. Eyes, empty and unblinking, followed me in every direction. Then, a sudden flicker, a spark from the embers, tiny, fleeting. The shapes wavered, but they didn't vanish. The smoke carried their presence, and it lingered, curling like a shadow in my chest. The circle was silent. The night pressed in. I could hear my heart beat loud in my ears. And the smoke, it hummed, softly, a low vibration that seemed to echo the whispers of the forest. I tried to move again. The weight on my shoulders pressed harder. I wanted to call out, but my voice was gone. Only the curling smoke remained. I dared to glance at the others. They were still quiet, still watching the empty circle. Unaware, safe for now, the figures hovered for a moment longer. Then they dissipated, not with a gust of wind, not with a sound. Just nothing. The smoke thinned. The circle was empty again. I exhaled slowly, my body trembling. The warmth of the campfire had returned, weak and flickering, but enough to remind me of the real world. The forest hummed softly once more, but the memory of the shapes, the way they lingered in the smoke, the way the circle had felt impossibly small, stayed with me. I didn't speak the rest of the night. I didn't move from my spot. I could feel the weight of the smoke figures in my chest, patient and silent. Even after the fire had burned low, I could sense them in the corner of my mind, waiting, watching. The lake was still that night. Mist hung low across the surface, thick and slow, curling around the dock like a living thing. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, heavy with the quiet of late evening. I walked along the edge, boots pressing softly into the damp sand. The water shimmered under the pale light of the moon. Everything seemed calm, almost too calm. Then I heard it, a voice, soft, clear, calling my name. At first, I thought it was one of the other campers. "Hello," I whispered back. My voice dissolved into the night before it reached the far shore. The voice repeated, again, but this time from behind me. I froze. The hair on my arms prickled. The air felt thick, as if the night itself had grown heavier. I turned slowly. Nothing. No one. Just a faint ripple of water along the dock posts. I whispered my name again. The voice echoed it perfectly. Clear, patient, unseen. I stepped closer to the water. The sand beneath my boots was cold and damp. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs stayed rooted. The voice was still there, repeating me, always one step behind, one step apart. A breeze stirred the trees. The faint scent of wet pine mixed with something metallic, faint and sharp, carried across the lake. The voice continued, echoing relentless. I leaned over the edge of the dock. The water reflected the pale moonlight. Ripples spread across the surface. Though nothing had entered the lake, each ripple seemed to push outward, as if reaching for me. "Who's there?" I whispered, almost to myself. The voice answered. Perfect imitation. Not a word different from mine. I spun. Nothing. The forest pressed in, silent and patient. The water glimmered in the moonlight, smooth as glass. Yet the voice lingered, echoing again, always from behind. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard. Every step I imagined taking forward felt heavier, as if the night resisted my movement, and the voice it followed, always mimicking, always patient. I reached for the dock railing. Cold would press into my palms. The water below rippled again. The moon reflected on the surface, but I caught glimpses of something beneath. Shapes, shifting, almost human, but wrong. I whispered again. The echo answered. From behind, a chill ran through me. The mist wrapped around my legs. The air smelled damp and heavy, full of unspoken waiting. I tried to step back, but the dock felt impossibly long, each plank stretching farther than it should. The echo followed, patient and precise, always behind me, always repeating. I knelt at the water's edge. The ripples spread outward slowly, circling me, whispering secrets I could not understand. The lake held the sound perfectly, mirrored it, returned it to me in a way that made my stomach twist. I dared to call out one more time. The echo answered, behind me, not distorted, not changed. Perfect. The forest was silent. Even the breeze had stopped. I could hear my heartbeat loud in my ears. The water shimmered under the moon, calm and smooth. But beneath it, I knew something moved, watching, waiting. I staggered back from the dock. The sand clung to my boots, cold and damp. The echo followed. I could hear in my mind now, repeating each step, each breath, each whispered name. I ran, my boots slipping in the wet sand. The voice echoed perfectly behind me. I didn't dare look. I couldn't. The mist thickened. The forest swallowed my path. The lake lay behind me. Quiet again, and yet the echo lingered, patient and unblinking, repeating my name from places I could not see. Even after I left the dock, even after the mist thinned, I could still hear it. Soft, deliberate, unavoidable. A voice that followed me. Patient, unseen. The lake itself seemed to hum quietly in the distance. A reminder that something waits there. Always. The forest was quiet that evening. Tall pines stretched upward, dark and still against the fading light. A faint breeze whispered through the needles, carrying the scent of damp earth and resin. I wandered among the trees, letting the quiet settle around me. The forest floor was soft, littered with needles and fallen branches. Every step seemed to echo too clearly, like the woods were listening. And then I saw it, a shadow, tall, impossibly tall, standing among the pines. It didn't move. It didn't need to. At first, I thought it was a trick of light, a tree stump, perhaps, or a cluster of branches. But no, its outline was deliberate. The proportions were wrong. Too long, too rigid, too human to be natural. I stopped. The air pressed close. The scent of pine became sharper, colder, metallic, almost. The shadow remained still. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it felt closer, not by moving, but by existing. Its presence stretched across the forest floor, touching the edges of my vision. I took a cautious step forward. The forest felt alive around me. Every pine seemed to lean slightly, stretching toward the figure. The ground beneath my boots felt firm yet strange, like the forest itself was aware. I held my breath. The shadow did not move when I looked directly at it, but the moment I turned away, it shifted, not visibly, not audibly, yet I could feel the change, subtle, deliberate, like a pulse through the earth. A faint rustle echoed behind me, branches brushing lightly against one another. I dared not look. The figure remained in my peripheral vision, patient, impossibly still. I whispered softly, "Who's there?" No reply, only the wind weaving through the pines, carrying the scent of damp wood, and something older, something patient. I tried to focus on the forest floor. Needles, moss, broken branches. Nothing moved, but the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the shadow occupied space beyond sight. I stepped back. The forest seemed to stretch unnaturally, the distance between the trees growing subtly. The figure did not. It remained anchored, patient, watching. I turned fully to leave. The shadow felt closer now, though it had not moved. Its presence pressed against the night, bending the darkness around it. Every instinct told me to run. Every sense screamed and never looked back. But curiosity rooted me in place. The shadow was impossible to ignore. Too deliberate, too quiet, too patient. I blinked again. When my eyes opened, it had shifted slightly. Not by walking, not by bending, but the forest itself seemed rearranged, the path subtly altered. I realized then that looking away gave it freedom. The air grew colder. The forest hummed softly, the needles whispering under an unseen wind. I could feel its attention, patient and deliberate, anchored in the darkness just beyond the trees. I swallowed hard. Every step I considered taking forward felt heavier. My chest tightened. The shadows of the pines seemed to stretch longer, reaching toward me. The figure did not move, yet the darkness itself flowed with it. I tried to retreat. The ground beneath my boots felt uneven, unfamiliar, like the forest was subtly reshaping itself around the figure. Each step backward made the shadow loom larger, taller, closer. I whispered again, barely audible, "Please, just leave me alone." No reply, only the subtle sway of the pines and the weight of eyes unseen. Finally, I turned and ran. Branches scraped my arms. The wind pushed against my face. But the shadow stayed behind, patient, unmoving, watching. Even when the treeline opened and the moonlight hit me again, I could feel it, tall, silent, unblinking, waiting in the pines. I didn't stop running until the camp came into view. The warmth of the lanterns and the campfires felt fragile, like a thin shield against the presence lingering in the woods. But I knew I would see it again, not by moving, not by chasing, but whenever I looked away, patient, silent, waiting. The cabin smelled of old wood and dust. Sunlight slanted through a cracked window, making the motes in the air glow like tiny sparks. I found it on the desk, a leather-bound journal, worn and frayed. I opened it slowly. The pages were yellowed, curling at the edges, filled with neat, cramped handwriting. The first entries were ordinary. Camp schedules, daily chores, notes about the weather. Then the tone shifted. The words became uneven, hurried, as though the writer had grown anxious. I read a passage aloud in my mind. "Black watchers, the lake knows, don't look too long." A chill ran down my spine. The ink seemed darker in the corners, smeared as if the hand had trembled with fear. Each entry grew shorter, more fragmented. Mentions of shapes in the trees, shadows at night, whispers carried on the wind. The last entry stopped abruptly. No signature, no closure, just a single word, half smudged. Gone. I held the journal in my hands. The cabin was silent. Only the soft hum of the wind through the cracks of the window. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the first to read these words, or the last. Even as I closed it, the memory of those black watchers lingered, patient, silent, watching. The dock stretched into the lake like a thin finger. The air smelled of wet wood and pine. The water lay still, glassy, reflecting the pale moon above. I leaned over the edge, curious to see myself. The ripples beneath my fingers made the reflection waver. And then it changed. My reflection was gone. In its place, the face. Pale, faintly smiling. Not me, and not alive in any way I could name. I froze. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth. The lake didn't move, yet the surface seemed alive, aware. I blinked. The face lingered. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It simply smiled. I tried to step back. My reflection returned for a heartbeat. Then it was gone again. The smile stayed, watching. I pressed my hands to my knees. The dock creaked beneath me. A soft ripple spread across the water, though nothing had entered it. The lake seemed to breathe, slow and deliberate, as if teasing me. I dared not touch the water again, not knowing whether the face would respond, not knowing if it would follow me beyond the dock. The moonlight faded slightly. The lake stayed still, but the faint smile remained. Fog rolled over the lake like a living blanket, thick, wet, clinging to everything. The trees disappeared into gray mist. The shoreline vanished beneath its weight. Then I heard it. Screams. Distant, fractured, impossible to place. They echoed across the water, bouncing from nowhere to nowhere. I held my breath. The fog muffled everything else. The wind, the birds, even my own heartbeat seemed swallowed. I tried to locate the source. Step by step along the dock. Shoreline stretching, fading into mist. Nothing. The screams came again. Closer this time? Or was it the echo, stretching endlessly across the fog? I stepped onto the sand. The ground was cold and wet. Mist clung to my clothes, my hair. The screams twisted, high-pitched, low, impossible to categorize. I couldn't tell if they were human or something older. I turned slowly. The forest pressed in. Shadows shifted beneath the fog, as though alive. But when I tried to see them, nothing was there. I whispered, "Who's there?" No reply. Only the screams carried on, fading, then returning, echoing from all directions. I ran. The fog swallowed my feet, my path. The screams followed, not behind, not ahead, but everywhere, surrounding me. The lake reflected nothing, yet the sound remained relentless, patient. By the time the mist thinned, the echoes were gone. Only my ragged breath and the lingering cold, and the knowledge that whatever screamed would not be found. I was walking past the cabins at night. The moon was thin, a pale sliver barely lighting the path. The wind whispered through the pines. A knock echoed from one cabin. Soft, deliberate. I froze. The cabin was empty. No one should have been inside. I knocked back, lightly. The knock repeated, perfectly in time, answering me. I swallowed. The air pressed heavy. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. I knocked again, and again answered. I pressed my hand to the door. Cold wood, no vibration, no presence beyond the knock itself, only the sound, soft, deliberate, unyielding. I stepped back. The wind died down. The pines swayed without reason. I waited. The knock came one last time, and then silence. The cabin was empty. The night swallowed the sound. But the memory of the knock followed me long after. I returned to my tent after the fire. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The camp was quiet. I saw the sleeping bag. It rose slowly, as though someone had lain inside. But no one was there. I hesitated. The fabric swayed gently. I knelt and reached to unzip it. The moment the zipper slid down, it collapsed. Empty. Nothing. My chest tightened. The night pressed in. The ground beneath me seemed colder. I could feel a weight, a presence lingering just beyond the shape of the sleeping bag. I stepped back. The air carried a faint rustle, soft and deliberate. The darkness seemed thicker now, almost moving toward me. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the wind, a fold in the fabric. But the memory of the rising bag and the emptiness that followed clung to me like cold smoke. I didn't sleep that night. Even under the warm light of the campfire in the morning, I could feel the space where someone or something had been, waiting, patient, silent. Night had fallen completely. The lake lay still, glassy under the moon. Mist clung to the surface, curling like smoke. Then I saw them, small lights beneath the water, glowing faintly, pale blue and green, like eyes reflecting from deep below. I leaned over the dock. The water shimmered around them. I wanted to stare, to understand. But the longer I looked, the more they seemed to retreat, slipping just out of reach, leaving only ripples behind. I dipped my fingers in. Cold, the lights vanished entirely, leaving the water smooth and black. I blinked. They returned a few seconds later, flickering beneath the surface like distant stars. A soft hum rose from the lake. Or perhaps it was my own chest, echoing the memory of something alive beneath the water. Every ripple carried the sense that something was aware of me, watching, moving just beyond sight. I tried to follow the lights along the shore, but the farther I went, the farther they slipped. They vanished to stare at it too long. Only ripples remained, concentric circles spreading outward. I realized then the lake was patient, and I was not. The lights were always just beyond comprehension, just out of reach, teasing, waiting. The night pressing around me. The mist grew thicker. The lights flickered once more, and I stepped back. The ripples faded. The memory of them lingered, patient, unreachable. The fire crackled softly. We sat around it, close, letting the warmth chase the chill of the night away. Laughter and whispers drifted among the circle. I counted heads. 1, 2, 3. Something was off. An extra figure sat at the circle. Not a camper I knew. Tall, still, watching silently. I blinked, counted again. Gone. The firelight flickered over empty air. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, but there was no one there. I could feel a presence, patient, leaning into the warmth, observing, waiting. I tried to speak. The words caught in my throat. My voice seemed swallowed by the night. The fire crackled again, a soft movement, like a brush against the dirt. I turned. Nothing. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something older, wetter, metallic. The circle felt smaller. The warmth of the fire seemed thinner, fragile, almost borrowed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loud. The figure, it lingered, unseen, present, patient. Even in its absence, I could feel it. By the time the fire died to embers, I could still sense the stranger. Silent, waiting. The lake was dark, the water almost black under the moon. I walked along the shore, boots crunching softly in the wet sand. A canoe drifted lazily, untethered, bobbing near the edge. Then I heard it, soft tapping, fingers drumming against wood. Deliberate, slow, patient. I froze. The sound echoed in the night, faint but impossible to ignore. I leaned closer, peering into the canoe. Empty, the tapping continued. Rhythmic, repetitive. I could feel it through the soles of my boots, through my chest, through my bones. I tried to call out. The words were swallowed by the mist. The tapping answered in its own rhythm, faster, lighter, or maybe I imagined a change. I touched the canoe. Cold, wet, empty, but the tapping persisted. Every nerve in my body told me to step back. The water rippled slightly, but the moonlight reflected nothing. The tapping slowed, then stopped. I thought it was gone. A soft creak, a shuffle. The canoe rocked slightly. I backed away. The night pressed in. The lake held its breath. The tapping had stopped, but I could feel the presence lingering, patient, watching. It was summer. The air smelled warm, of pine and dirt and fading daylight. Yet that night, the lake froze. Ice spread across the surface, silently, impossibly fast. The moon reflected on smooth, glassy water, now solid beneath its light. Figures moved beneath it. I watched, frozen in place, shapes shifting just under the frozen surface. Too large, too deliberate, human and not human at once. They slid silently beneath the ice, their movements slow, patient, deliberate. I stepped closer. The ice groaned faintly under my boots. The shapes paused. I could feel their gaze, their awareness, pressing up to the frozen lake. The night grew colder. Even the forest seemed to shiver. The shapes moved again, tracing the underside of the ice with unnatural grace. I wanted to look away, to step back, but I couldn't. The ice beneath me seemed thinner, more fragile than it should have been. Every instinct told me to run. Every sense screamed danger. Yet the shapes glided beneath the surface, patient, watching, alive in a way that chilled my bones. The moonlight faded slightly. The frozen lake remained. The figures beneath it, patient, waiting. Even after I ran to the shore, the memory stayed. The shapes under the ice, impossible, silent, eternal. I walked the path at night. The camp was quiet, the forest thick around me. Lanterns flickered faintly, casting shadows across the uneven ground. I stopped. A cabin appeared farther along the shore than I remembered. The path leading to it stretched longer than before. I approached slowly. The trees seemed to bend subtly, guiding me, reshaping the ground. The cabin didn't move visibly, but the distance it had changed. I tried to step closer. The forest stretched unnaturally beneath my feet. The cabin remained in place, impossibly distant, yet I could see every detail. The windows, the door, the faint glow of moonlight on its roof. I reached the porch. It felt colder than it should. The door creaked slightly. I thought I heard whispers, soft and deliberate, carried from inside. I stepped back. The path behind me twisted subtly, unfamiliar. The forest seemed to shift. The cabin remained, waiting. The night pressed close. I didn't look away. I didn't move for a long time. The cabin had changed. The path had changed. And I realized then the building itself was alive. Even as dawn approached, the distance stayed. The cabin lingered, patient, impossible, untouched by the passage of time. The path leading to it, endless. Night had settled fully. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. The air smelled damp and rich. Pine and moss mixed with a chill shadow. Then I saw them, eyes, pale, glowing faintly between the trees. At first, one pair. I blinked. 2, then 4. They multiplied as I watched, small points of light, growing into dozens, dozens into many more. The more I looked, the more appeared. They weren't fixed on anything but me. Patient, silent, I stepped forward. The needles on the ground crunched softly beneath my boots. The eyes didn't move. They multiplied instead, reflected in the darkness, mirrored in every shadow. I tried to turn away, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly around me. Every step revealed more eyes, hanging low in the brush, high in the branches, glowing faintly in the mist. I whispered to myself, they can't all be real. But I felt them, the awareness pressing in, patient and deliberate. The air grew colder. Every branch seemed to sway toward me. The eyes multiplied further, almost filling the forest with their pale light. I realized then I was not walking through the woods. I was walking through their gaze. Even after I left the edge of the forest, the memory lingered. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them, always watching, always waiting. Midnight. The camp was asleep. The only light came from the pale moon, spilling across the dining hall windows. Then it rang. A bell, clear, deliberate, cutting through the silence. I froze. No one should have moved it. No rope, no hand. Only the sound, echoing across the lake, carrying farther than it should. I stepped closer. The air pressed heavy. The forest leaned in, patient, listening. The bell rang again, faint, deliberate. I tried to follow the sound. It led me through the trees, past cabins, over the wet grass. Every step I took, the ringing carried farther, impossibly precise, patient. The wind shifted, cold and metallic. The bell rang again. No motion, no rope, no human hand. Only sound, lingering, echoing, impossible to ignore. I reached the dining hall. The bell hung motionless. Silent now, but the sound, it lingered in my chest. Patient, heavy. Even when the first light of dawn touched the camp, I could still hear it faintly. Ringing, waiting. I leaned over the lake's edge. The air smelled of wet pine and damp earth. The water was still, dark, almost black. I reached in, curiosity tugging at me. Cold, ice cold. Then grip. A hand grabbed mine. Strong, cold, deliberate. I yanked back. The water rippled, but no one surfaced. No shape, no shadow. Only the weight of the hand, vanishing as suddenly as it came. I shivered. The chill followed me, climbing up my arms, filling my chest. The lake lay calm, still, as though nothing had happened. I looked around. No one. The forest stood silent, patient, indifferent. I dipped my fingers again. Nothing. No hand. No ripple. Yet the memory remained. The cold weight. The invisible presence beneath the surface. Patient, waiting. I stepped back. The shoreline stretched endlessly. The forest hummed softly, carrying whispers I could not place. Even after I left the lake, I could feel it. Cold. Patient. Unblinking. I followed the trail out of camp. The night was dark, thick with mist. Every step felt familiar, yet wrong. The path twisted, curved, looped back. I stopped. The clearing ahead, the lake, the pines, the cabins looked the same as before. Impossible. I turned, walked again. The trail stretched endlessly, circling back to the same lakeside clearing, the same trees, the same soft hum of the forest. I ran, step after step. The path never ended. Each loop brought me back to the same spot. The forest pressed close. The night was patient. Every shadow felt deliberate. Waiting, I shouted. The echoes returned to me unchanged. The trail never changed. It swallowed my steps, refused escape. I stopped, breath heavy, chest tight. The clearing lay before me once more. The lake still, the pine silent. And I trapped in a loop I could not break. The path never ended. It never would. And the forest waited. Days later, far from camp, the city smelled of asphalt, exhaust, and distant rain. Everything felt normal, except the corner of my bedroom. A shadow lingered there, tall, dark, patient, unmoving. I blinked. It didn't shift. It didn't breathe, but it was aware, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. The shadows cast by the streetlight, the corner itself. I went about my day. The shadow remained. It didn't move closer. It didn't leave. I tried leaving the room, returning. The shadow stayed. I slept with lights on, curtains drawn. It stayed, patient, unblinking. I realized then it had followed me from the lake, from the camp, from the forest. It existed in the corner of my room, in the edges of my vision. I could feel it pressing in, patient, relentless, unseen. Even as I stepped outside into the brightness of day, I felt its gaze on me, waiting. I knew it would always be there, in the shadows, patient, silent, and I powerless.